Aloha, welcome to Light Diamond Creative Podcast Season 2, The Awakening Audiobiography. Oh my goodness. Well, welcome. Thanks for listening. If you have been listening to this podcast chronologically as it has been delivered to the YouTube platform, I just want to say that these next episodes are going to be a little lighter. Now, this is a subject, the awakening process, that definitely is not all rainbows and sunshine. There are some dark clouds. There are some thunderstorms, some typhoons, some hurricanes, some earthquakes that we are addressing and addressed in the last couple episodes. Just to clear up, this is episode 8. The past few episodes may have the numbers mixed up a little bit, so if you were aware of that, I'm glad you were aware of that. We're going to realign and come into this episode, which is episode 8. And episode 8 is pretty cool. We are talking today about telepathy and powers of the mind and the process by which I began to open up into this knowing, this part of my personal awakening journey. The last few episodes, again, as intense as they were, at least they felt that way for me. I cried. I'm not going to lie. If you didn't listen to it, I cried. I needed to get some stuff out. And hopefully it was beneficial to you to listen to somebody else's story going through what you heard me go through. And all of it is for the purpose of really sharing experiences along the awakening path. What is the awakening path? We've touched on it in some of the other episodes, and you've probably gotten some information about it from online sources, or maybe if you're lucky, some people around you and in the 3D. This process, to me, seems to be a process of awakening to the reality around and within us, the truth around and within us. And sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes the truth is tough. But then we have people like Martin Luther King who would say, "The truth shall set you free." And I definitely agree that at this time on planet Earth, it would definitely be beneficial to redirect ourselves into the essence of truth and integrate truth into our regular individual and collective process. So, although the truth isn't always fun, at least it's real. That's how I view it. I would rather be given something real than something sugar-coated or something that is just an outright lie. And we all have dark moments in our lives. I don't think that life is complete without them. Talking about yin and yang, talking about contrast, talking about the dark night of the soul and all of the amazing lessons that can be found in those spaces if we decide to not be consumed by, even depression or all of the darkness, Got to see the sunshine again at some point. So in the last episodes, we talked in episode 5 about addiction, drugs, and awakening. We talked about Ben, if you have been listening, and I do recommend listening in chronological order because it will all make more sense that way. But talking about Ben's stories and really using his life and death experience to share knowledge and wisdom that has been gained from that. And personally, for me, Ben was one of the biggest chapters in my life that opened me up into the awakening process, partially because he was the first person I had been so close to who died, and also because it was such a tragedy. It was such a traumatic experience due to how he died and the lead up to that point. But important to talk about. There are so many people who suffer from addiction. There are so many people who suffer from mental and emotional illness. And, sometimes, well, no, I would say that almost all the time that I see America talk about health, it's the physical, which is fine because, we want to be in good physical shape. But what we don't talk about is how important it is to be in good mental states and emotional states. And what we don't talk about is how these mental and emotional states affect physical health, including life or death, sending us in one direction or the other. So, yeah, it's been intense up in here. Okay. And then in the next episode, we talked about awakening to death, awakening to the severity of Ben's mental health and addiction. We talked about the experiences between Ben and I and our friend group as we walked through life together from December 31st, 2016 until the day that he died. So it has been quite an experience to finally share this information with you all and share my perspective on what went down, because at the time it wasn't something that I felt like I could talk about, and I didn't know how to talk about it. Mental health has been such a taboo subject for unknown reasons. And so I guess I succumbed to that and really kept a lot of things to myself, really internalized a lot. And in the process of talking about this episode specifically, it brought up a lot within me that I had repressed. And this is something that happened over 6 years ago. Something that I have learned in the recent years is that if we carry repressed energy, repressed emotions, repressed mental trains of thought, if we do not express these, then the energy of those thoughts and the energy of those feelings stays within the body and can eventually, if remaining repressed, result in a physical ailment, a chronic illness, an acute pain. And so a lot of my journey, my health journey in the last couple years has been to express myself, even if it's uncomfortable, because I would like to release that energy from my body. And hopefully along the way of being witnessed doing that, you become inspired to do the same for yourself. I truly believe in the power of expressing oneself and communicating and finding healthy outlets of coping. And this is one of them for me, sharing these stories over the podcast. It's been a huge part of my awakening path. And not only is Ben part of it because of his life and death and our experience of it, Ben is part of my awakening journey because in his life, he was such a great communicator in a lot of ways, better than most people I had ever met. And he was powerful at illuminating truths about social reality, about governments, about all sorts of religious concepts. He really challenged the norm. And I had never experienced someone like him before. And so it was so amazing to listen to somebody have other perspectives than what I had heard before. It did a lot of good for me to witness him. And so he has been part of my awakening due to the concepts that he introduced to me along our time together. And something else that he brought into my life, into my awareness, is the main point of what we're talking about today in this episode: telepathy and powers of the mind. Ben's story. So, if you have been listening, you know that Ben and I didn't watch TV. And I loved that about him. I loved that he brought that into my life, experiencing each other without the influence of the TV, without sitting down and watching something. We would go outside and talk. And on the patio, listening to Ben, sometimes we would even play music and karaoke to it, like just the two of us, up until 3 a.m., playing the music, trying to sing along with it, or just finding new songs together, or talking, or whatever. And it was in one of these nights that I became awakened to the possibility, the reality of telepathy. We're listening to music out on the patio, and there's this song, The Great Divide. I can't think of right now who it is. I would have to double check that sings that, but The Great Divide is the song. And when that song came on, first of all, it's an epic song. When that song came on, Ben looked at me. We were both sitting down, and he said, "I want to try something with you. I want to show you something." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Put your forehead next to mine." And we leaned forward in our chairs facing each other, and we put our foreheads together. And throughout the entirety of the song, we held our heads touching and didn't say anything. And in this time of our heads touching and waiting and listening, there's something that happened in the mental realm. It can be difficult to explain, so I'll do my best. The first time I had ever experienced this, our heads are touching, the song ends, we had made some sort of extrasensory connection, because when we drew our heads away from each other, still no words, but there was a space within my mind that, with my mind's eye, I could see Ben and I in. It was as if there was a giant dark room, and his spirit was there and my spirit was there. And our words, although we didn't speak any, they were like whispered statements. He would say something, I would say something in our minds. He would say something, I would say something. And in the physical, we sat about 3 or 4 feet apart while this interplay occurred within the mind. And I asked him, "What is going on? How are you doing that?" And he said, "I don't know. I've always been able to do it. Let's try again." And so we played another song, and we put our heads together, and we waited. We stayed that way for the entire song and pulled ourselves apart when it ended. And it's still happening. This room, this dark room in my mind where I'm there and he's there, and although no words are being spoken and no visible or audible exchanges are happening, there's this presence of his words. And then my mental and internal response to him. And I scratched my head. How is this possible? What is this? Is it even real? What is going on? I knew that it was real. Well, first of all, because I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know, he didn't say, hey, we're about to try telepathy. He didn't introduce the concept. There was no word given to it. We didn't ever say the word telepathic. So in this space, this dark space where our spirits are, I can see it in my mind's eye, and there's this conversation happening back and forth. And then he says something funny, which is totally classic of him because he was freaking hilarious. He says something hilarious in our telepathic communication, and in the 3D physical reality, I laugh. And he, in the physical reality, recognizes my laughter as a response to something he said in the telepathic realm. And so that is the night I was introduced to the reality of telepathy by Ben. We had entire conversations up there, validated by him in the 3D, validated by me in the 3D, and then finally asking again, how did you do this? How is this possible? I don't know. I've always been able to do it. And I would like to highlight for a moment that Ben, as he was in the end of his life, was finally sharing with someone an ability that he had had as long as he could remember. There are many of us who have gifts we aren't yet able to put words to. There are ways that we as individuals experience life, and society would say that that is abnormal, that is crazy. The truth is that the societal programming would want us to believe that it is crazy. They've put concentrated effort, not everybody, but there have definitely been intentional attacks on the use of telepathy and extrasensory gifts, programming us to believe that if we hear something extraordinary, if we experience something like what I experienced that night, that we're insane. But it's just not true. And further down the road, I would be illuminated to some of the science behind this process of telepathy, which I'll share at the end of this episode. This first night with Ben isn't the only night I experienced telepathy, although it was the first, and I'll never forget. I'll never forget Ben for introducing that to me and the way that we experienced it together. After Ben's death, I was in a really deep grieving process, and I really missed him. I miss him these days. It's different, though. It's more like I miss being able to connect with someone on the level that he and I were able to. I miss the connection. In those days, he was all I could think about, and grief changes over the years following the death of our loved ones. In those initial days and nights, I missed him beyond what words could say. It enveloped me. It was everything around me. Everything around me was Ben, and Ben is gone. I mentioned in a previous episode, it felt like half my cells died. Half of me died. A part of me died. And so there was this one evening where I just couldn't take not being able to connect with him And I remembered the night on the porch when we had practiced telepathy together. And I wondered if that was still possible across the veil. I wondered if that was still possible while he was in spirit and I was here. And so I started looking things up online. Telepathy, I just looked up telepathy and how to do it. Scrolled through a few things. And then I finally came across a practice that resonated. And I didn't know that word then. I didn't know the word resonated then. But it felt like it could work, and it felt like it would be fine to try. What harm could that bring? You know, there were no red flags along the search when I finally landed on this piece, and I'll give it to you. It recommended visualizing the person's face who we would like to connect with telepathically and focusing in on that person's face. Now, I had pictures of Ben, and there were a couple that really were close to my heart. And so I imagined his face from one of those pictures. And then it recommended to imagine a cord of energy spiraling between the two of us, me and who I would want to connect with, Ben. Visualizing his face and imagining this energy spiral from my chest, from my heart to his. And I read it, I thought, okay. And then it said, if it doesn't work the first time, don't give up. It's like riding a bicycle, the article said. So if it doesn't work immediately, keep trying. And I did. I laid there in bed and I visualized his face and I imagined this energetic connection spiraling between our hearts. And there came a moment when the connection was made. A distinctly different energy came over me as soon as those cords connected to each of our hearts. And I felt Ben arrive. I felt Ben next to my bed. And I remember just laying my arm out over the bed, my arm, part of it hanging off the bed, my hand out so I could hold his hand. It's not that I could see him, but I could feel him and I could hear him. Not like the voice that you're hearing from me now. It's not like that. Maybe if you're extra activated in the clairaudient gift, maybe you would hear a voice. But for me, telepathy has been recognition of a thought that does not belong to me, recognizing the essence of Ben, recognizing his presence, because there's no way that I could have recreated him in my mind to the extent that his energy and essence was present and real in that moment. And so we held hands. He sat next to my bed. And I remember talking to him. I remember him talking to me and us just being so excited that we were able to connect this way again across the veil. And it was probably past 3 a.m. I had a really hard time falling asleep at this point in my life. I was usually up until 3 or maybe 4 a.m. And I was lying there in my bed, and he and I had connected through this telepathic process, and I couldn't fall asleep. And I didn't want to, because here we were together again, even though I couldn't see him or hear his voice. And so I decided to stay up we decided to stay up all night long. And I know how this may sound to some people, but trust me when I say that I debated for a long time the realness of what I was experiencing. And I knew it was possible that in my grief, I was going nuts because I was losing it. I was having a really hard time. However, as I've said before, the fullness of someone's essence cannot be recreated by one's mind. In order to connect with someone, and in order for the fullness of their being to be revealed to you, it must be them. And after a long time of debating that, I finally just surrendered. I said, okay, this is real. You know, he and I had experienced it on the porch. He and I were experiencing it then. And with everything he said to me, I knew it was him because I couldn't have made it up. There's no way. He was too authentic. He was too different. He was too Ben for anybody to recreate. And so we stayed up and went outside. And at this point in my life, I was also staying outside a lot at night to listen to music and sing and, you know, those things that Ben and I had done together that I really liked. It was a way for me to continue coping, going outside and listening and singing. And so after making this telepathic connection this night, we went outside and sat and looked at the stars and laughed and watched the sunrise. And after the sunrise, it was time for him to go. If we're talking about spirit side, which he was and still is on, it takes energy in order for these connections to happen. It is an energetic process, and the spirits on the other side who would like to come through are not always able to because of guardians who allow or don't allow the connections to be made. And also, these connections cannot always happen because one who is on spirit side is not always gifted enough in that moment to be able to connect that way. You know, if you're thinking of someone who you would like to connect with on spirit side, sometimes the time is not appropriate. Sometimes the abilities are not yet there. And sometimes there are things that would prevent the exchange from happening according to what spirit side sees fit. And in that night, we were blessed to have the time together. And after the sun rose, it was time for him to go. He couldn't stay. He couldn't stay that present with me, and I couldn't stay that present with him. I just remember being so happy to have connected. It was one of the best days that I had had in months. That night, or the day following that night, after being able to feel and, you know, in a sense, hear him again and laugh with him, to be present with him, I'd missed that so much. And so I had the best day. I was just elated to have experienced that reality with him, to have connected. It refreshed me. It rejuvenated me to a point. And following that day and night, I did not continue to connect with Ben that way because I was in such a position of grief that I knew about myself. If I continued to connect with him that way, I would, in a sense, become addicted to it, and I would lose all footing in this physical reality. I didn't want to. I had my brother, I had my family, I had people who cared about me, who had reached out to me and shown that. Even if I wasn't able to reciprocate it in that time, I knew that there would be people who missed me and needed me, and I just couldn't let myself go to spirit side that much. I had to stay footed here. And so we didn't connect like that again. Later down the road, I had been awakened to the possibilities of telepathy, as you can hear, and I started to open to the idea that I could do this more frequently. And someone I knew, she had a husband who had just passed away. And so I wanted to create an art piece for her because I just felt for her so much. Ben and I weren't married, and that's a good thing. But we weren't married, but I just felt for her so much for having lost someone she loved so much, going through that myself. And so I had been creating art, and I felt really pulled to create an art piece for her. She gave me a picture, and I went into an art studio and I started to create. And this art studio, this wasn't open to anyone else. It's a private art studio, lots of space, lots of table room for me to really get everything out. And as soon as I started to create that piece, I felt her husband on spirit side coming through to connect with me while I made that piece for her. I remember drawing certain aspects of her, and he would comment to me about her and how much he loved her, the shape of her nose. He would give me specific comments, which I don't really feel like is something you need to hear because they are for her. But he gave me specific messages. And, at this point, making this art piece, hearing such specific things and feeling his energy next to me, I surrendered, and I decided that along with the art piece, I would tell her what I had experienced as he was present in the process of making the art. And he wasn't the only one present. Best believe Ben made himself present. It was so clear. It was clear as day. I could see him in my mind's eye as I listened to music. I could see he and her husband, the woman who I was making the art piece for, her husband, I could feel her husband and Ben dancing. And I was just like, another thing I couldn't make up. Listen, Ben had moves, and they were ridiculous and funny and coordinated and on beat. It was hysterical to watch him dance. It was so much fun. And so, I couldn't recreate what he would have done to that music, but I could see him in spirit in my mind's eye dancing to this music, and he and this other guy in spirit having just like the greatest time together while I was making this art piece and while the woman's husband told me specific messages that I would later give her. And when I did give those messages to her, the specific details of everything, it was undeniable that he was there. I didn't know that guy except for maybe the week or two before he died. And I didn't know her that well either. And so there's no way that I could have made something up that would resonate with her the way that it did. It rang true. And that is validation. That is proof that it is real. And if we were doing a scientific study on it, and I'm a biologist, so I am suspect of stuff. I do request proof. And that was proof enough to me. To have been given specific information by him through spirit as I drew them together, and then to deliver that information to her, and for her to identify those specifics as something that he had told her in life. It's real. It is real. And then years later, after practicing meditation, I started in 2018. So I'd already gone through the experiences like what I've just told, and I was about to move back down to Florida. This series of meditations I've been given originate in Tibetan Buddhism. And the general Buddhist, one of them, the general Buddhist beliefs is in reincarnation, in energy, in the energetic realm and the power of it, the movement of energy, something I've begun to call the biology of energy, and energetic awareness. And I was witnessing all of this, all of the meditations and the telepathy and the connections with spirit side, witnessing it from a biologist perspective. How is this real? This is so beyond contemporary biology, but here we are after practicing a Tibetan Buddhism meditation series that would open me up to the energetic awareness that was going on in and around me. The experience was the proof. And something that also helped is that, okay, so let's go to psychology for a moment, and let's go to the term projecting. What is projecting? Projecting is the result of unresolved trauma. Projecting is also related to the ego and the desire to be right. And projecting is taking our past experiences and, like with people, though this person did this to me. Projecting would be this person in the past did this to me, and this person who's in front of me now is probably that way too. I'm projecting my past experience onto a present situation, assuming that they are the same without allowing them to demonstrate themselves differently. That's projecting. And so, in order to receive the truth of reality, in order to experience trueness, I recognized that I needed to work through and release my own projections. And I also wished to surrender my ego, because the ego would project what it wants to be true that would further reinforce its state. And if I humbled my ego and instead of desiring to be right, desired what is real, desired to be shown what is true, it is more likely for reality to be revealed without the mixing up that projecting will do, that the ego will do. It will give us enough space to see and hear truly. And then I also experienced, another instance that comes to mind with telepathy and hearing truly, hearing the thoughts of others. There was an experience years past 2018, this was closer to 21, where I was in a yoga class and this woman and I had become friends. And our friend was teaching the class too. We were in a spiritual setting as well, which amplified the energetic potential. And we were doing a stretch, and then we moved to the other side and did the stretch that way. And when I moved into the stretch, I heard her thought. She was looking at my tattoo. My back was to her, by the way. She was looking at me, my back was to her. And I felt her thought wondering about my tattoo on my arm. It's a band. And here's the thing too, is that practicing awareness is when we expand in awareness, we are able to grasp that thought coming into our field from someone else. Telepathy is happening on a subconscious level most of the time. A subconscious level because maybe we haven't yet practiced awareness enough to be able to identify that thing crossing our field. But I had practiced awareness enough to where when I went into this yoga pose and her thought occurred about my tattoo as she looked at it from behind me, I caught the thought with awareness, and I thought to myself, she's thinking about my tattoo and wondering where it came from. And I held on to that because I wanted to ask her later. That's the proof part of it. Can I get proof that she was really thinking that in the moment that I caught her thinking that? Here's the test. And so we got out of yoga, and then she and I start to drive away. And I remember to ask her, I said, hey, when we went into that pose, were you wondering about my tattoo? She says, yes. I was wondering where it came from and what it means. And so then we went into the discussion of where it came from and what it means. And it was confirmed that, yes, in that moment that I had caught her thought coming into my field, she was wondering, what is that tattoo? Where did it come from? What does it mean? Validation, boom. And then further down the road, I would be illuminated to the concept of the electromagnetic field. The combination of my biology knowledge and the experience of meditating through these practices from Tibetan Buddhism opened me to receiving knowledge about the electromagnetic field. And so what I understand now, this electromagnetic field, we'll just touch on it for a second. It's also got a whole episode in season 1, people. The electromagnetic field. We are electromagnetic on a subatomic level, a cellular level, a systems level, and a body level. Everything that has mass is electromagnetic. And with humans specifically, because of our organization and the placement of the central nervous system, this is the core of the body where messages, uncountable, infinite messages are sent back and forth at the speed of light. Electric currents create magnetism. And so here we are with this central core that is creating an electric field, the process of who knows how many messages going back and forth any given second. And this electric current creating a magnetic field around us. And so we are beyond our skin. Our energy exudes beyond the skin, and how far? It depends on the state of health one is in physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. It depends on the level of awareness as well. And so what was happening in the moments with my friend in yoga is that our electromagnetic fields, our auras were overlapping. And I had practiced awareness enough to catch her thought, electric thought, as it came up within and out of her into my field, where with awareness I was able to pick it up. This is the science of telepathy. This is what I believe is going on. And awakening to that reality, to that potential, understanding that it is real and true, is mind-blowing enough to alter the perception of reality itself. That is episode 8, Telepathy and Powers of the Mind, practicing with Ben in life, in death, and continuing to experiment with it personally as I continued on, as I marched forward one day at a time. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share with another. Give it a thumbs up if you want to. And if you really would like to support the continued delivering of this information, feel free to donate to Light Diamond Creative on Instagram. Well, you wouldn't donate on Instagram, although I bet that is something coming soon. But you can donate to Light Diamond Creative on Venmo or Cash App. You'll see the brand. It's the same as what the YouTube channel shows. Thanks for being here. I hope you all have a great day and feel free to experiment on your own with telepathy and powers of the mind.